I think you're just messing with me, right? So what's been really interesting so far is that we talked to customers yesterday, and particularly around this supply chain disruption issue that they're seeing. I think the problem is actually much worse when you're experiencing it. We have customers that are looking at like a 20x increase in memory costs. We have customers that are sort of going through their data center and they're literally disassembling boxes to see if they can reassemble them together. Because the prices, they either can't find them, the prices are exuberant. We've had customers that pre-bought materials in 2025 because they expected that it was going to be this way in 2026, but they have no plan on what they're going to do beyond that. So it is a real issue that customers are facing. And I think, the question is like, why is this such a pain for them? So it's more of a structural issue. And the reason why it's structural is because the economics are actually driving the disruption itself. So we have 3 vendors that are driving 95% of the production of memory. That memory is actually those materials are actually being redirected for higher margin, high bandwidth memory, which is then included with the GPUs and put together in a package. So if you even look at the statements from some of the vendors like SK Hynix, they've said it's at least twice the capacity to build the same amount of high bandwidth memory as it is to build DDR5. It's an economics thing. So what happens is if you're making 3 to 5x the margins on your high bandwidth memory and your DDR5 is also costing more, then the vendors are actually economically incentivized to be able to put towards the higher bandwidth memory, but then also leverage the gains that they're getting from the higher prices on DDR5. So in the past, it was more of a supply chain disruption. This is more of a disruption driven by AI. And as long as that AI demand continues to remain high, it's going to drive the need for high bandwidth memory, which is going to starve the materials that are needed for DDR5. And this will be kind of a structural change kind of as we move forward, because even if you look at some of the announcements from NVIDIA, now you have the Vera CPUs that are packaged with the GPUs, and the CPUs are also going to be competing for the same memory that storage systems need as well. So if you're just kind of hoping to wait this thing out and wait for prices to come back to where they were in like 2023, 2024, I don't think it's going to happen. And the squeeze that really puts is that for customers that are in this refresh cycle, they're continuing to generate data. And so a lot of the hardware refresh cycle is being generated by having to either manage aging hardware or manage capacity. And that capacity doesn't really care kind of what your lead times are. You're going to continue to generate data. You're going to have to continue to have a place to put it. And that's really what's causing this pinch. So it's high prices. Data's continuing to be a growth area for every business. It's independent of any vertical. And so the question is, well, what do you do about that? When you think about kind of the output or the intelligence of a business is embodied, it's actually embedded in the unstructured file data that the business creates. So it's not just PowerPoint files, it's not just design files or CAD files or media files, but it's actually the time and the energy that it took to create those. And that creative energy, that intelligence that's baked into those files is actually where the business value lies. So when you kind of go back to like what you should be doing, you should be managing the value that's in that data, not just the infrastructure that's needed to store that data. And so what we're trying to do is, and what we're doing with projects like AI Activate and some of the other areas, is to really help companies be able to gain the intelligence that's locked into their operational file data, that operational file layer where they're actually generating intelligence, where the work happens, and really looking at unlocking that for our customers. What you really want to do is to find a different way of approaching the architecture that breaks you out of that cycle. So even if you made it through this cycle, you just have to do it again. You should just reevaluate like why you're even doing this. And so the value that I believe that Nasuni brings, and this is where I think it's a better architectural model, is that you're actually allowing Nasuni, you're allowing hyperscalers to kind of manage the capacity growth that you have, and you get to focus on you get to focus on pulling the intelligence and the value out of the data that you have. So once that data is in an environment where there's a tremendous amount of build out in infrastructure for supporting AI workloads, then you have the ability to take advantage of what's in your operational file layer by pulling that into the agents that will then go and drive additional value and help you pull that intelligence out to bring that to your employees, to bring that to your historical view of how the business is done, to be able to make connections kind of across the life cycle and the lifetime of that file data that you might not have been able to do before because it was just impossible to be able to find what you needed or be able to correlate it together. I think as a CTO or a CIO, you have to focus on driving strategy, not just driving costs. And so finding a way to be able to offload the management of the capacity where you can focus on the strategic enablement of that data value, that intelligence, and bringing that out up a level into the agentic layer, into the AI layer that your customers are working with, that the people within your organization. And then your strategy is to focus on driving business outcomes, not just managing infrastructure, and becomes much more of a strategic view, a strategic play, because you're actually driving that revenue for the business, you're driving those outcomes, you're creating possibilities where before you would have been tied up in the day-to-day. So it's really elevating, I think, the role that you're able to focus on. It elevates the role of the teams that you have that are doing the work as well. Well, I think the concerns are around data leakage. So, we've heard multiple stories where I thought that I had locked down this data so that only the people in the right department could be able to look at that or be able to read it. And then all of a sudden you connect up to that data and that data is actually then exposed to the entire company. I mean, I've heard of entire sort of AI initiatives being put on pause because some data from some internal project was leaked to some employee that didn't need to know about it, then leaked it externally. So I think governance and security is a true concern. And you don't want to manage that security and governance independent of how you manage the security on the file data that you use for your day-to-day work. You actually want a unified governance model so that you can look at it. You know what's authoritative. You want to look at a single copy of data. You don't want that data necessarily to be copied and uploaded into one chat session over here and another one over there, and you've got multiple copies and all of your governance is gone out the window. So, understanding the governance around data and making sure that that data is secure in a way that meets your company's policies is certainly one. Performance is another. If you're expecting, your agent or your chat session to be able to search through billions of files to be able to find the answer, it's like having to read every book in the library to be able to find the information that you need. And it's not just about searching to find the information. It's then how do you actually consume that information or correlate that information across multiple sources to be able to take action. And I think it's that sort of speed of increasing decision-making based on the current and the historical knowledge of the organization, securing that data in a way that you aren't losing control of the governance of it, and being able to find new insights in a way that allows you to be able to have kind of a differentiated advantage in your speed and decision-making and your ability to take advantage of opportunities that are in front of you right now. I think you have to, so first off, token spend is going to continue to explode because we want to use AI to be able to generate the fastest and the best outcomes that we want, that we can achieve. The problem is when you're sort of very indiscriminate about what those searches are or across sort of the entire base of your unstructured files, or you keep searching over and over and over. So every query that you give it, if it has to redo that search, then it's actually generating burn of your OpEx. So the actual return on investment for each token that you spend is actually decreasing because there's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of waste. So, things like optimized search, things like sort of maintaining kind of LLM optimized queries to make sure that you aren't unnecessarily hitting the back end of your file storage, increases like the revenue per token that you spend. And that's really the way that you want to think about it. You want to not just indiscriminately sort of assume that every token is created equal. You want to think about what is the actual revenue opportunity? What is the revenue that every token that I spend is generating? That's an ROI that companies need to think about. And it's very difficult to be able to do that if you're sort of indiscriminately sort of spraying your queries across billions of files just to try to find an answer, which is kind of the equivalent of searching for a needle in a haystack. So I think that all three of those are really interrelated. I think for the hardware refresh, again, you want to focus on driving outcomes, not just driving projects. So find a way to break out of the hardware refresh cycle so that you aren't hitting a wall when it comes to capacity management. Focus on driving efforts that pull the value and the intelligence and elevate that out of that operational file level and bringing that into your agentic solutions, driving better business outcomes. And then thinking about cost, you have to think about that not all solutions are created equal. You actually want to think about how do you optimize the elevation of that intelligence, the elevation of that data for just that point in time where it's needed to respond to that particular query, to provide that particular insight that drives that particular decision that you need to be able to make for that moment. Well, in some cases they can't. So there's a PC refresh cycle today, right, where older operating systems may be out of support from security systems, which is security patches, which is actually forcing a refresh on that side. Or if you're used to carrying kind of the cost of hardware across 3 years, and then you're carrying it across 7 years. Well, if you think about sort of the generational jump in GPUs is every 18 months, the jump in CPUs is every couple of years. You know, it's like trying to, for those that might remember, it's like trying to run modern workloads on a 486 or an old Pentium chip. They don't have the horsepower, they don't have the capability, and in many cases you don't have the memory even in those systems to be able to sort of drive those types of high performance workloads. So you're gonna suffer sort of no matter what you do, and you're gonna be disadvantaged because you're not gonna be able to drive sort of at the cycle and the velocity that you need to drive the business at. I think it's interesting because, you know, generally they are separate portions of the business and one gets squeezed for the other. But in many instances, it's like squeezing a balloon. And storage is actually getting sucked into AI for a lot of those workloads as well. So they may be in separate instances. They may be seen as different, historically as different initiatives, but they're really part of the same. You can't drive AI without context, and you can't drive context without data. And that data is part of your storage solution. So they're really interleaved, even though most customers may be viewing them as sort of separate cost centers, and you can squeeze one to feed the other. But you really have to look at them as being interrelated parts of the same strategy. Yeah,